Genesis 22 is where we're going to be today, and I wanted to ask you I'm sure we've all at some point had to give up something that we've loved. I'm sure at times you've all had to give up something that had become dear to you. I used the example the other week about, kids have blankets they carry around till they're, my oldest son had one that was this big when he got it, and then by the time he finally turned it loose, it was like this big, and it was not even the same color. It had a very vociferous odor to it. It was several years old, but he didn't want to give that thing up. And when you have to move, everything changes, and things like this are normal. Having to give up things like that, and they're painful. But they're not out of the ordinary, because change is something which we all have to accommodate. But what would you think if someone gave you something they had been promising for a long, long time, and then came back sometime later after you had really gotten attached to the gift, and then demanded that you give it up? Nobody wants to do that. We used to have a name for that when I was a kid. I'm not going to say it. It's probably politically incorrect. But we had a name for that. Most of us would throw a fit and attempt to hang on to what had been given to us. That is normal in most cases. But what? Let's look at something that's slightly different here. What if God gave you the desire of your heart? He allowed you to have that desire for years. Something you'd waited for a quarter century. And then He gives it to you, and there you are. Everything is awesome. And then, we'll get into His age later. And then years later, He says, all right, I want you to kill it. Kill him. I want you to get rid of the gift that I gave you. And our first thoughts are, wow, what a cruel God. How could you give someone the son they've been praying for, that you'd promised them for years, and then all of a sudden, in the prime of his life, you say, kill him? I mean, just to kill is one thing, but just take it away. I mean, how can you get any worse than that? How can you be any more cruel than that? But as Christians, we then have to ask ourselves, is there something that we're missing in all this? And at any rate, it is a strange story. However, there is gold to be mined from it. And Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, we read about Abraham and how he handled this situation. It says, now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Then He said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. The phrase after these things refers us back to the previous chapter. Things that were written, that we read about in Genesis 21. The main portion of that chapter being the sending away of Ishmael. And it's now plain that Isaac is the only heir of Abraham. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There cannot be anyone that can come along and say, there can't be a fight to be the heir of Abraham's household. You have to understand, this is a place in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So not only does God have to get the honor for this, as it being is Isaac being a miracle baby, Ishmael cannot be involved. There can't be 2 bulls in the pen fighting for anything. Abraham has been sent away, and now here we are. Isaac, depending on who you want to read, is anywhere from 25 to 31 years old, depending on whether you're reading the Targums or any other ancient literature. So we always think about, you got to be careful sometimes getting your impression of things from a lot of Sunday school literature as you're a kid, because we think this is a little boy walking up the mountain with his daddy. Not at all. This is a grown man. A man who could probably take the old man if he wanted to, if he figures out once he gets to the top of the mountain what's going to happen or what's supposed to happen. But this, needless to say, we've come down to the point that God has made it so that there is no doubt Isaac is the only heir in the house. In verse 2, God told him to take his only son and go to the mountain of Moriah to sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Now, the first time when you think of child sacrifice, this is paganism, pure and simple. That's the first thing, if you know anything about history, that comes to your mind. And that's what the skeptic would say. Look, the Bible, the Christianity is no different from paganism. The Christians have borrowed from ancient paganism. They have the same signs, blah, blah. No, not. They don't know what they're talking about. But we have to go deeper into the story in order to get all the clues. First of all, we look back at verse 1 and see that God was testing Abraham. Testing Abraham. And we have to be careful to make the distinction between tempting and testing. Temptations come from the desires within us. James chapter 1 verses 12 through 16 says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren." So don't ever be deceived is to thinking, well, God's tempting me. No, he's not. God doesn't tempt you. If you are tempted, it's because something inside of you has seen something it likes, the shiny thing, whatever, and said, ooh, I got to have that. And then this birth process begins, and then it grows and it grows, and then it becomes an obsession, and then you go do something really stupid. You know, buy something you can't afford, chase someone else's wife, buy a Chevy, something dumb like that. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man." So if you're being tempted, you haven't been tempted in any way that no one else has. Jesus was tempted in all ways such as we've been. The Bible says there's nothing in the world but the lust of the eyes. You see it and you want it. The lust of the flesh, I got to have that. And the pride of life. That'll make me smarter, better, stronger, make me a chick magnet, whatever the case may be. That's all that is there. 1 Corinthians 10:13, once again, "No temptation has overcome you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it." The hard part is wanting the escape. That's where most of us run into our problems. On the other hand, testing comes from the Lord when he has a special purpose to fulfill. In 1 Peter 1:16 and 1:6 and 7 talk about this. It says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith," genuineness. Are you just talking smack? Or do you really mean it? Are you the real deal? Or are you what do they say now, a poser? Playing Christian. The genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. To tempt means to make one to stumble. To test means to see if one will do what is required of them. Temptations are used by the enemy to bring out the worst in us, while a test is used by God to bring out the best in us. Sometimes we have trouble distinguishing between the two, but we'll talk about that. Temptations seem logical. That makes sense. Whatever that is that I can't afford, it's nice and I really need one. That seems logical. She's a lot younger. That seems logical. He's a lot taller. That seems logical, whatever the case may be. while tests seem to be unreasonable. Vis-a-vis, take your son to this mountain and kill him. It's unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination. And while all believers face similar temptations, we've already read that, we don't all face the same tests of our faith. Think about that. Lot was not tested the same way Abraham was. He wasn't told to take his kid. He didn't have a boy anyway, as far as we know. He wasn't told to take one of his daughters to the mountain and sacrifice her. No. Lot was not tested the way Abraham was, because Lot was being tempted, not tested. He was being tempted by the world and had not matured in his walk to the point that he could even be tested by God in that sense. It should actually be considered as a compliment when we're tested. You know, if you have a good horse, you ride him. If you got a good running back, you run him, you just run him. And you run him, and you run him. And a guy who wants that takes that challenge, he'll give me the ball, coach, give me the ball, coach. It's 4th and 48 with 30 seconds left. You know, I got this. You don't want the guy that walks in the huddle and says, all right, we're going to throw it to you. No, I wouldn't do that if I was you. I was planning on taking this play off. I'm tired. You don't want that. You want the guy, give me the ball. I got this. And so we should actually be seen as a compliment when we're tested. God won't send a test until He knows we can handle it. Now that ought to be comforting. I'm being tested. Oh, then I got this. Give me the ball. Not like, really? Another test? Whatever. But you have to understand, a passing test grade means, I hate to say it this way because I've seen it on television. They start ranking Christians, you know, well, he is at this level and you're at this level. It's not that. But it does mean a promotion of sorts is at hand, because it shows that you, have moved forward in what we're calling the school of faith. It could also be expressed as one having grown in his or her Christian walk. That is the process of sanctification. Upon salvation, you begin a process of sanctification. I know some folks, I talked to a guy, he told me, I was saved such day, and on March 28, 1963, I was sanctified. Really? Okay. Well, you're done, I guess. I don't know what else there is for you to do. You've achieved, No, but that's a process from the time of our salvation to the time we pass away or the Lord comes at the time of the rapture, whichever comes first. And then we receive our glorification in a new body. But this is what we're in right now. And so you should expect tests as well as temptations. Discerning the difference can mean all the difference in the world. But all of this begs the question, because he's testing Abraham, if God knows everything, He's omniscient, all-knowing. He declares the end from the beginning. If that is so, then why does He have to make Abraham go through this? Meaning He knows Abraham's going to pass the test. God's already seen this. He's run the tape all the way out to the end. Hey, he's going to do all right. But why is He running him through this then? Because the test isn't necessarily for God to see if Abraham's going to do it. The test is for Abraham to see what he would do, as well as for the rest of us that would read it. That we would be able to see what Abraham did in the hopes that we also would have faith of this caliber. It's for us to see. God already knows it. But Abraham has to go through it. You can, when you're teaching somebody something, you can go and tell them where all the notes are on the neck of a guitar. All right? You got it? I got it. Can that guy play a guitar? No. You have to work through it. You have to practice. There's muscle memory and other things. And so when God puts us through this, He doesn't just tell you, all right, here it is. You got it? Yeah. Okay, and I'll go on my life. No. You have to work through it. Hands-on training. Why? To test the genuineness, is the word used there, the genuineness of your faith. Because anybody can talk a good game. But it's when something is under pressure that you see what comes out. And if you're never put under pressure, nobody ever knows. But when you put in that press, what comes out? Filthy, filthy, foul, foul, blankety, blankety, blank? Or, Lord, please help me. You see, that's the difference. Realize what's going on here. That is that Abraham waited for decades for this son of the promise. He has already had to send away another son, a son whom he loved, that he took fishing and hunting and threw the football and baseball and sheltered him from soccer and things such as that. Because it's a Christian home. And gave him SEC jerseys. But the point is, this is gut-wrenching. This boy had raised up, and they're out there in a manly world. They got cows and goats and everything else, and riding on the range, Roy Rogers, all that good stuff. Shooting and killing stuff, eating meat. And there are no vegetarians back then or vegans. Or we've degenerated to that point. But back at that time, all of this is manly man stuff. And then he has to send him away. After he's gone through all this and raised this boy, he's had to send him away. This is gut-wrenching. This is the kind of thing that makes people curse God and walk away from Him. I don't want this test. I didn't sign up for this. I thought, everything's going to be rosy and smurfy and hip and groovy and everything else after this. And now, bam! Look at what's been dropped on me. And that, I don't know, I can't tell you how many times in the entirety of my ministry I've seen that. Someone comes in and they get on fire for the Lord and they're, woo! They're just going, all of a sudden, boom! It's just something hits them like a ton of bricks. And they just can't, and some of them walk away. I didn't sign up for this. I don't want you to be, I don't want you to have any misrepresentation of what Christianity is all about. It's not about upgrading your flight, your seat on the airplane of life from coach to first class. It's not what it's about at all. You know what it's about? It's about this. You're on an airplane, as it were, of life, and it's going to crash. Do you want a parachute, salvation, or do you want to go down with a plane? That's the difference. There's a way out of the inevitable crash at the end, and that is the salvation Jesus Christ has given us. It's not about moving you up to the big seat where you can lay back and you got, not the little bitty screen in the headrest of the person in front of you, and then they kick it back like this, and your knees are. It's not about that. The plane is going to crash. Do you get a parachute or not? Abraham has waited decades for this, and after waiting decades for a son, he's told he has to get rid of one son, and now he has to sacrifice the other, and sacrifice as a burnt offering. You got to kill him and then burn him. It's horrible. He finally got what he wanted. And what had been promised to him, and now he has to give it back, or at least give it away. What do we do in such situations? What are our options? Well, one, you can get mad at God and you can keep your Isaac. And therefore Isaac, who was supposed to be a sacrifice, becomes an idol. Because now he has supplanted God's place in your life. We can attempt to bargain with God. And we've seen that, sometimes that's not bad. Abraham's like, well, look, if there's 50 folks in the city, will you not nuke it? Yeah, if there's 50. What about if there's only 40? Because Abraham knows that place is bad. Maybe I can get him on down, And if you've ever been over there, that's the culture. They love to dicker about stuff. Don't ever pay full price for anything. They'll get mad if you give them too much money. They want you to whittle them down. But you can attempt to bargain with God, and as long as it's sincere, I think most of us kind of do that. Or we can do what we've been told to do, which is always the hardest thing to do. What would you have done if you put yourself in his place? Well, the key here, because you're obviously worried about the boy. And in this way, my wife doesn't know. According to the Targums, Sarah didn't know what was going on. We're going fishing. And they're gone for a few days. And she's, well, you make sure you keep my son safe. Yes, dear. You hide the knife behind your back. Because you can't tell her, or you won't ever make it to the mountain. So all this family dynamic is going on. But the key in seeing through the end of the thing is knowing the character of God. We have to know that God has our best interest in mind. You have to know that has to be set in concrete. That has to be foundational to your entire walk. Abraham knew because God had promised him that this was no ordinary son. Isaac is a major cog in the wheel that makes up God's overall plan for the world. And we have to know that God would not He wouldn't wreck a plan like this. Therefore, if God gave him Isaac and then God wanted to take away Isaac, then that was what is best or was best for all parties involved. We have to be able to think that way. I didn't say it was easy. We have to think that way. So what happened? Let's look at what Abraham did. Verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. He split the wood for the burnt offering, arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder." See, Abraham's a southern guy. Yonder. And it has different meanings. You can be over yonder, which is out there somewhere. Back yonder. Down yonder. Up yonder. It's a great word, yonder. I don't know how you say it in Hebrew. I didn't look it up. But it's good to know that that's God created Hebrew. And we got the word yonder from it. So anyway. But he says, the lad and I will go yonder and worship. Underline that. And we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife. And the 2 of them went together. So Abraham raises up early. He doesn't do what Eb would do and procrastinate. Thinking, oh, God, I got to really do this. And and what am I going to tell her? And what am I going to tell him? And what about the guys going with me? He just gets up and does it. Now, it's close to 45 miles from Beersheba to Moriah, which is the mountainous area now called Jerusalem. It was Jerusalem or Salem back then, and it was a good little hike. So Abraham got up, he split the wood of the fire, gets the servants together, they pack everything up, and they head for the mountains. And then on the 3rd day, and the phrase is not here just to be here. All right, Hebrews don't do that. The Israelites didn't write that way. If it's in there, it's in there for a purpose. The 3rd day is the same day that Jesus rose from the dead. And hence we get this typology, this all throughout this. And the Hebrews aren't ones to put useless information in their writings. And just in case you're a little thick, they tend to repeat it. And this is what Abraham had done on such and such day. On the day that he did what God told him to do on that day wherein God told him to do it. That's kind of the way it goes. You got like 2 or 3 shots to get it before you move on to the next page. So Abraham is told to go to a specific mountain. Solomon would later build the first temple on Mount Moriah. And if you go there to Jerusalem today, you'll see that you got the Temple Mount. And then just outside the Damascus gate, which is to the north, which goes toward Damascus, hence the name. The Damascus gate is there. The road goes to the north. And nowadays, right across from that is a bus stop. And behind that is Calvary. And it looks like a skull. You're looking at it. But Jesus wasn't crucified on top of that hill. They didn't do that. They crucified criminals right next to the road. It's like hanging you on a light pole right out here so everybody can see you. But that was a quarry. That's why you got all those holes in it. And the bus stop parking lot is a quarry. You can still see large pieces of stone that were quarried to build the temple on the mount there. So somewhere, I believe, just for the sake of typology, that Jesus would have been, on top of that, the skull right behind that bus stop. And you can actually, a good SEC quarterback could throw a football from there down to the Garden Tomb. If you're ever over there, I encourage you to go see it. But there's all sorts of symbolism in this account, because Jesus would eventually be crucified on part, and it's a ridge that runs through there. So anywhere he is on there, he's on the mountain technically. In verse 5, we see that Abraham left the servants behind and took Isaac with him to the top of the mountain. He placed a bundle of firewood on Isaac's back, and he carried a torch to light the fire. When they got there, and most of you, once again, as I already gave it away, but most of you are probably imagining a young boy struggling under the weight of the wood. However, this time, Isaac was close to 20 years old, somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. I wasn't there, hadn't seen the birth certificate, but according to people that were, you got about a decade to work with right there. The word translated lad, it also means young adult. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the first century, says that Isaac was 25 when he went up on the mountain. Some of the Jewish Targumim, or Targums we'd say in English, claim that Isaac was as old as 36. Take your pick. I don't care to argue. He was big enough to carry firewood, and he could have probably whipped the old man if he wanted. All right? That's the way it is. We see here that Abram tells the servants that both he, and this is why I told you to underline this word, that Abraham tells the servants that both he and the boy will return. And once again, this must have been gut-wrenching, because he knows he's going to have to sacrifice the boy. Now, if he's like most of us, even though he's going along with a plan, he's a guy. That means you just brood on it and mull it over. You don't necessarily share. Don't talk about it. You sit there and brood on it. And you mull it over, and you go to that box. Ladies, you know what we do when we get that blank stare. And there you are. And that's as he's walking up this mountain, I'm sure he's probably pretty quiet. And he's like most of us, once again, he's probably constantly praying that God will intervene at any moment. He's not procrastinating. He's moving forward. But he's had 2 days now to mull all this over and ask God for a way out of this situation. And I don't blame him. Every one of us will do the same thing. Now, when we are in difficult situations, and none of us has ever been in one as tough as Abraham is here, but our focus needs to be on the Lord and what His will is for the situation. There's something to be said for the person that quietly goes through the test while praying for God's deliverance. Abraham hasn't freaked out. He hasn't had a meltdown. He didn't go by the pharmacy to get pills so that he can cope. He is moving forward while seeking God's help. Moving forward. And it was, I think, Albert Einstein, writing to his son who was struggling in college, said that, you have to pedal the bicycle and continue moving to keep your balance. You always have to be moving forward. And so he's moving forward while he's seeking God's help. Once again, he knows the character of the one he worships, because he has a relationship. It's not religion. It's not like this, do this, say this, can thing. It's a walking, talking, living relationship. And we have to ask ourselves, can that be said of us? Do we have that sort of relationship that can move on, move forward when God has asked something of us is as hard as this, when we're being pressed? Do we cut and run? Or do we continue moving forward and attempting to follow the will of God? Now, as the two started up their journey up the mountain, Isaac notices something. He's a smart kid, young man, 20, 25, 30 years old. He's a smart guy. Verse 7 says, "But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, 'Father?' He said, 'Here I am, my son.' Then he said, 'Look, we got fire and wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?' Now, if he's going to cut and run, this is the time to do it. I would take the firewood off my back, throw it at his feet, Dad's feet, so he trips if he tries to come after me, and I'm heading off the mountain fast." But you don't see Isaac doing this. which is a great testament to his relationship to God also. Abraham said in response, verse 8, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." So the two of them went together. And they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abram stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now Isaac has already noticed. He's already figured this out already. There's no animal to sacrifice. Abraham tells him, well, the Lord's going to provide his own sacrifice. This is a kind of way to answer the question without necessarily answering the question. As a husband, he's good at this. You kind of give him enough to keep him satisfied without getting you totally in trouble as of yet. You know the punishment will come later. But sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. And so he's run through this. Some scholars would say that this was a way to just avoid telling Isaac that he was a sacrifice. Others say that that it is an allusion to Jesus about the lamb being provided. Others say that Abraham knew there was going to be a way out of this. I personally think that all of these things were rolling around in Abraham's head. I don't think he wanted to come out and just say, son, you're going to be sacrificed when we get to the top. That's not practical, I guess you say. I don't know how much Abraham understood about the promise of a coming seed, but I do believe that he had faith that God would make good on his promise. John 56 says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. This is Jesus speaking. And he saw it and was glad. He saw it in what he's going through at this particular moment in Genesis 22. And I believe that the whole time he was praying that somehow he wouldn't have to sacrifice his son. But if he did have to go through it, we're told that he believed God would raise Isaac from the dead. We're told this in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17, 18, and 19. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, not tempted, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Very important there. Of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So, at any rate, he didn't have all the details, but he continued to move forward. Warren Wiersbe's put it this way, our faith is not really tested until God asks us to bear what seems unbearable, do what seems unreasonable, and expect what seems impossible. You haven't been tested. Hey, let me give you a test. Here you go. Here's a 5-pound dumbbell. Can you do it? I can do that all day long. What's the test? Give me, most of those bars, the steel bars, when I was coaching football, I think were 40 pounds. Then they start slapping on the weights on the end. And, of course, if you're barking orders at football players all the time, eventually you won't, come on, coach, let's see you do it. Well, that ship has sailed. I had a line that was average 6 foot tall and 300 pounds in high school. There's no way I'm picking up what these guys can pick up. So you come up with some sort of excuse and leave the gym for a little while. But you see what you're made of when you're put under that pressure. And the Bible is full of instances that require a miracle as a solution. Moses and Israel were trapped between Pharaoh and the Red Sea. David faced down Goliath. Joseph was in prison and had to get out. They had to be asking, why am I here and where is God when I need him? And we've all asked those questions at one time or another. We're constantly looking for the solution. But as logical as that may seem, maybe that shouldn't be our aim. Because as Christians, we live by promises, not explanations. And you need to write that down somewhere. Look at the situation in which Abraham found himself, then place yourself in that same situation. Most of us would immediately ask God, why, Lord? Like the old song, why me, Lord? And we would quickly follow it up with, why me? Why, Lord, and why me? Can't you do that guy? He teaches Sunday school. He sings. He does all kind of stuff. Hit him. He's the one everybody's looking at. I just kind of ease in and ease out. And the Lord said, no, I want you to be, maybe a little more like that guy. Look at this situation. And what it does when we ask ourselves, why me? Why, Lord? It suggests that we may not know God or ourselves as well as we might think. Because if we truly understood these things, the why wouldn't even be asked. We would know. It's time for a test. It's time to graduate. Abraham believed God would raise Isaac from the dead, and if that were necessary. And once again, you have to understand, faith does not demand explanations. Faith rests on promises. Now, I don't believe that the Bible is a book of blind faith. There are all sort of apologetic reasons throughout. Any question the skeptic has, I'm ready to answer. I mean, the Bible has the answer. Philosophically, scientifically, historically, archaeologically, the Bible's got the answer for it. But we're talking now about our walk with God in these tests and strange circumstances. And at that point, faith does not demand explanations. It rests on promises. Abraham believed God when he didn't know when, where, how, or why. And he raises a knife to kill Isaac when he's stopped by the angel of the Lord. And Jesus called out to Abraham to stop, and so he did. Verse 11 says, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham. He called him twice, just so make sure he would hear. Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. And I'm sure he has a little relief. I mean, he's Abraham, somebody's yelling, but at least I don't have to drop this knife right now. He said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Another, and we've talked about this is another title for God here, because as Abraham goes through life following the Lord, you see he builds altars, he piles up these rocks, he builds altars marking special places in his walk with God. Not only a physical location, but a time in his life where God showed him something, God taught him something, when God moved in his life. And we need to build those altars, the markings, the demarcation. I remember, because you can always go back to the altar. That's why it's there. For Israel, to always go back and say, why are these rocks piled this way? Well, this is where God did this at such and such time, to bring things to our remembrance. All right? And this is what he's been doing all throughout his walk with God. And he takes a ram for the burnt offering. And as he goes, this is the point I want to make. As he's gone throughout this, you see God, if you go look back through the Bible, you see that God has revealed a different name, which reveals a different quality. A different, I hate to say personality trait, but a different ability, a different aspect of God that he is using. And so Abraham is learning names, places, stuff. All of this is building his faith and his knowledge and his relationship with God. Why? So he can come back to it and, well, Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Jireh, Yahweh Yara. It has to be something like, he remembers all these different names because these are different aspects of God. And he's not just heard them, he's not just telling them. God provides. How do I know he provides? Because this is when he did it, this is how he did it, and that was where he did it. I've got the hands-on experience with it. Abraham is told to stop now because the test is over. Verse 12 says, now I know you fear God. And God knows the end from the beginning. The test, as I said earlier, was for Abraham as well as for us. Abraham is a testimony to what faith can do. And when Abraham looked around, he sees a ram caught in a thicket and sacrificed. Do you remember last week, Hagar and Ishmael were out of water. and she lays him down in the bush. She goes over here about a bow shot. She doesn't want to see him die. And Ishmael is the one praying. And then God speaks to Hagar, and she looks up and she opens her eyes, and there's a well right there in front of her. Because when you're in the middle of it, you can't see the solution. You can't see it's there a lot of times. That's why you lean on others, because they can help you see it. But God is pointing. And now all of a sudden, now there's a ram. Now, I personally don't think it was there before all this happened. I think or he walked up and got hung up in the bushes. But we see the ram caught in the thicket, and it shows us the concept of a substitutionary atonement. This is to appease God's wrath of sin by a substitute. So you see the typology is continuing to go, pointing to Jesus Christ. And just as a ram was a substitute in this case, Jesus was our substitute. He died for our sins. The Targum of Jonathan states that the ram had been from that particular ram had been provided from the beginning of the world. Now you can look at this a couple of ways. As I read it, Pastor Stu helped me find this. He's the one that sent it to me. As I read it, that ram, male sheep, was provided. God made him during the creation week and stuck him over here in his own pen. And then when Abraham needed this, God turned him loose and he got his horns hung up in it. But it also talks about later, and this is where the New Testament gets this, that the lamb was provided from the beginning, from before the creation of the world. So you see, God already knows. He builds a perfect creation. He puts man in this turnkey environment, and guess what? He gives them a tree. Don't eat it. He knows they are. But he has to give them a choice. Because love without a choice is not really love. That's just being a slave. That's just being a robot. That's a Stepford wife. They just kind of go as their program. They don't stay there because they love you. You understand? So God knows that, and he knows what Adam and Eve are going to do, and he already provides the atonement, the substitutionary atonement. When God gives Israel the law, he knows they're going to mess up. How do I know this? Because he tells the penalty for sin. When they mess up, you're going to do this. He knows that Israel is going to eventually come to God and say, we don't want a theocracy anymore. We want a monarchy. We want a king like everybody else. How do I know God already knew that? Because in the law, he already gave the rules for a king way before Israel ever had a king. He's already seen it coming. And here we have just another example of that. Isaac, here he is, a young man in his prime, and God stopped Abraham, who was being obedient, but we also had to see that there was another person being obedient on that mountain, which was Isaac. Young man in his prime, strong, strapping young lad. He could have easily gotten away from his elder father had he wanted to do so. But he was complicit in carrying the firewood and being bound on that pile of firewood. You understand, he has to sit there while his daddy ties him up. And the obedient son is part of the symbolism we need to see, because while in this instance Abraham was praying for a way out and got it, almost 2,000 years later Jesus prayed the same prayer and didn't get a way out. Lord, he said, Father, is there any other way? Sweating blood, thinking about what was coming at him. And he said, Lord, is there any other way? Matthew 26:39 says, speaking of Jesus, he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, he turns it around that fast. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And then again a second time in verse 42, he went and prayed, saying, Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. Now he carried a cross, not firewood, but they would have served the same purpose. You're carrying the thing on which you're going to be sacrificed. And then Hebrews 11:1 says, Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And faith allows us to carry on with the plan of God for our lives, even though we don't understand them when we're looking for the solutions, but need to be looking for the promises. If you aren't in the middle of a test right now, you will be. Bobby Briganti's in one right now. Some are bigger than others. None of them will be like that Abraham faced, though we may have a tendency to blow them up to that size. I've always said truth is absolute. Trouble is relative. And that means whatever trouble you're going through is way bigger than anybody else's. The Reverend Jasper Williams years ago said there's always someone worse off than you are. And that's the truth. We have to understand the character of the God we serve. There are some people who have to have all the details. I'm not one of those people. Most of the time, too many details just kind of overwhelm me. I'm like Ronald Reagan. I got an idea. I got good people. Go do it. The details just kind of overwhelm me. I relish the fact that I don't have to know everything about everything that is going on around me, because my mind cannot handle it. I'll just be glad to tell you that. I just kind of plod along, most of the time at a very slow pace. Ask my wife. When we go in the grocery store, she leaves me behind. I just plod along, knowing that God will work out the details before I get to that bridge. Now, I say that, I'm not putting myself up. I'm not a giant of the faith. I promise you. I'm just like everybody else. I have good days, bad days. But many of us, as we read through this passage, seem to think that Abraham was going through with the test and only began to worship after the ram was found in the thicket. Not. Because worship carries the meaning of, this is the baseline meaning of it, bowing to the will of God. Therefore, Abraham was worshiping throughout the chapter. Because from verse 1, we see him bowing to the will of God. You can sing as loud as you possibly can. We can raise our hands until they go numb and not be worshiping God. You can be getting your praise on all you want. That doesn't mean you're worshiping God. It's only when we are acting in obedience from a foundation of faith that we're truly worshiping God. And this makes worship a lifestyle and not an event. You know, in the worship, what we call the worship part of the service, that's not for you anyway. That's for God. That's His part. Those offerings go to Him like it says, King James says, a sweet savor, like sniffing barbecue. You know, it's like, yes. You know, and that's what it is. It's not about entertaining you, though you do want the music to be right and good and people have to sing in key and play in key and be in time, all of that. Otherwise it's distracting. But it's not the same as a concert. And it's not about just getting you to move your feet or what have you. That's God's time, not necessarily yours or mine. So we can sing as loud as we want, do all those things, but that doesn't mean that we're actually worshiping. And then when you realize that worship is a lifestyle and not an event that we do at 11, what time are we? 10, whenever we start here, 10:30. Yeah. 11:30, well, yeah, whatever. Whenever we start. It doesn't start right then. It's a lifestyle. It's a mind blow. You have to understand. I do know the character of the God I serve. And knowing that and knowing that worship is defined as bowing to the will of God instead of just music or whatever you might want to say, it makes all the difference in the world as to how you go about your life. Like I said, I'm not a giant of faith. I'm no different than anyone else. But I do know the character of the God I serve. And I know that He has my best interests in mind. And I know that if I obey Him, though I can't see it now, everything will be all right. And when I cease to look for the explanations and learn to focus on the promise, ironically, life gets easier. And I pray that peace, that you will also have that peace. Would y'all bow your heads, please? Dear Heavenly Father, Father, we just come to you in the name of Jesus, and we've seen one of the great stalwarts of the faith, Lord God, A man who was just like us, who did well and then did bad, just depending on what day. We've seen him go through probably one of the greatest tests any mortal man could go through. And Lord, you brought him through it. And he is an example for us as to how we are to get through that also. And Lord, though we want to ask, why? Why me? Why, Lord? Why now? Why this? Why that? Lord, that's not the right question. And it should be more something akin to, all right, Lord, give me the ball. I got give me the ball. Walk forward in your strength. Bowing to your will, which means that we're worshiping throughout the test. That's not just singing a song after the test is over. We're worshiping throughout the test, throughout the day, throughout our lives. And Lord, we just thank you for the power and the enabling to be able to do that. And so, Lord, I do ask that we would understand that faith does not rest in explanations but promises. And if we don't take anything else home, we take that with us. And Father, as we conclude here today, Father, I just ask for the peace of everyone, the peace of Jesus Christ, Lord, to be on the heart of everyone here. Though they might be going through a test, they've just gone through a test, there's one coming up and they don't see it coming. That, Lord, they'll remember this when it hits them. And we just thank you for your salvation and all you've done for us, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. In Jesus' name I pray.